Hello, everyone. This is episode 29 of the Dresden Files podcast, a member of the Broken Jars Network. And the title for this one, I am very proud of because we're talking about gear, guns, and gadgets and stuff. And I got the alliteration, and it's really fun. Today, it is just myself and Justin and Andreas, and we're joined by a guest named Matthias. So please introduce yourself, Matthias.
Hi. I don't know what
Hi.
to do for an introduction otherwise.
Well, introduce yourself by telling us your favorite 3 books and your favorite character of the series.
Okay, so I'll start with favorite character because that one is easy, and that's Vaterum is my just absolute favorite character. As for 3 books, I'm going to go with, I think the obvious one for a lot of people is Deadbeat, Changes,
Yep.
and I'm going to go with Turncoat.
Very
So-
good choices.
Yeah. They're all right. I think like a few diamonds. At least you didn't pick Ghost Story.
Ghost Story is a good book, damn it. All right. I guess we can just get into the brunt of this discussion, except I have to explain myself a little bit. I made a document, and I'm going to share the document of all of the stuff that we were researching and putting in. And it includes everything I thought was relevant, all of the gear from everyone in the books and whatnot. But this got so large that we had to split it up. We're only focusing on the first 3 books this time. And this still took us 2 weeks to do. But I also can't really...
To be fair, it didn't take me very much. I didn't get to look at that much. It was pretty much all Alex almost, or like all you?
Yeah. I whatever. But I still also can't really defend where I put certain things, because guns are really obvious, but like some things are in gadgets instead of gear, or gear instead of gadgets. This section of the document is I just have to admit I can't defend my choices.
This was alliteration over practicality.
So-
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
I know when I went to go add some
so
things, I added it and then found it in a different section. I was like, oh, I'll take that out then. So, but yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
It works.
I'm just really proud of the title. But, all right.
Here's Guns
So
and
for
Gear.
this-
The whole episode is just based on you coming up with a nifty title.
Yes. But this episode, we're going to be talking about what is Harry, and everyone else using in these 3 books. Are they using them later? Why did they stop using them? Like the evolution of everything that is not a spell or a person. Let's start with guns, because it's simple and defined, but it's also not. And I'll explain that in just a second. Part of the difficulty of talking about guns is that there's a lot of different types, and any of the descriptors of them is not very specific. Because if you say semi-automatic, that can mean almost anything, because that just talks about how it comes out of the gun. So like an M16 can be automatic or semi-automatic. It's just...
Yeah, and I think the distinction is mostly made for the purpose of finding out if the character sort of legally purchased it. Because if I recall correctly, and I'm not an expert on American gun law, but I seem to remember that there's a law against fully automatic weapons.
Yeah, so everything that is not military should be a semi-automatic. Therefore,
Yeah.
it could be anything. When, Butcher just writes, it's in semi-automatic. I don't know what to picture, but it's probably, this type of gun, like a handgun versus a fully long rifle, depending on things.
Right, that's some of it. I mean, semi-automatic is the loading mechanism. So mostly he goes, revolver, semi-automatic, fully automatic. Not very often does he use the words assault rifle or things like that because it's not a very good descriptor. So,
Yeah, which is half the problem that we have in our American legislation.
Yay.
Let's start with what we can find in Stormfront, because it's actually really short. Harry has a 38 Chief Special, and then Susan uses it against the Toad Demon because she's under the influence of the love potion. But so what that means is that it is a Smith & Wesson Model 36, which got called the Chief Special because it's just a little bit different barrel size, I think. But the 38 just means the diameter of the bullet. So when they're talking about 22, 38, 45, that's all just the diameter of the bullet and what kind of gun it can be compatible with based on the size of the barrel.
Yeah. Um,
And then Murphy has an unspecified revolver that she uses against the Scorpion in Harry's office. And then the Becketts use unspecified automatic guns against him. I'm guessing they're more like assault weapon types, considering they're doing the whole drug ring thing.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, as you pointed out in the notes, like that could be anywhere from, small submachine gun types all the way up through, assault rifles. But considering the fact that they're using them while naked, I always kind of assumed some kind of submachine gun, like, MP5, Tech 9, Mac 10, somewhere in there. Like the classic bad guys, if you go watch 80 movies with like Chuck Norris and shit like that, it's always the Uzi. It's like, I got this little one-handed, fully automatic, whatever, so that's kind of how they stand in.
Yeah, I always found it fun. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting here that Murphy is using a revolver because almost every time she's referenced after this, she's almost always using some kind of semi-automatic weapon.
That's a good point.
I can't remember her using a revolver even. Like,
I was kind of surprised to see that in the notes as well. So, and what's interesting to me is that, if we go by most common firearm, certainly at her size, it was probably something like a 357 as well, which puts it in the same, like a cousin of the 38 special. In some configurations, the rounds are interchangeable. So she's practically using the same gun that Harry is, and maybe that was laziness. Who knows?
Yeah, or maybe just like the classic image. Again, we're sort of talking about image in the same way we were talking about the Uzi earlier. A revolver is very much sort of an archetypal, especially for like a cop who is kind of unorthodox. It'll almost always be a revolver. The classic is Dirty Harry, but
right.
This is obviously a much more smaller pistol, but the same principle sort of applies of it being something for a very unorthodox policeman or policewoman in this case.
Right. Yeah, and
what are the rules actually in America? I know that in TV series and movies there is a standard issue gun you get like from the department. I mean, I think that's standard, but sometimes detectives or whatever, they choose to use their own gun. Can they do that? How does that work?
I actually did a little bit of research on that for Chicago specifically. I found out that the Chicago Police Department actually does not issue a service pistol. You have to buy it yourself. They have sort of a series of specifications, like they have to be bought from these gun makers, but they don't, at least as far as I was able to find out, have a service weapon on hand. So it's...
You have to buy your own gun as a police officer? That seems crazy.
There are some, municipalities that do that. It really is jurisdictional. It depends on where you're at. And it'll be important to keep in mind that there's American gun laws and then there's Chicago. Because Chicago is, first of all, it's the murder capital of America, depending on which sensationalist news article you're looking at. But they also have much, much, much more stricter, they're in the top three.
Like Detroit.
Well, it's the top three are probably Chicago, California, and New York State, as far as, well, New York City specifically. But I wouldn't put it in the top three, no. And it's like a three-way tie, if you ask me. So... they're pretty crazy because New York City was the whole, we're only going to let you put 7 rounds in a magazine type, and in Chicago, it's a little fluid because in the last couple of years they've been fighting against handgun bans and things like that anyway. But Chicago's very restrictive. So
yeah, there's also a difference in terms of government as to which level government, like city or state. You might not get a special issued thing just for you, but if you're in the federal level, I'm pretty sure you will. Like the FBI has a standard issue gun, a couple of models, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But like in the military, you get something issued to you versus if you're just like a city cop, maybe it's different.
Yeah.
The level of government.
Yeah. And
so
that's why
I'm going to move on to Full Moon and talk about the FBI thing. Because Ben and Denton and Wilson and Harris, all FBI agents, and they all have the standard issue FBI guns, presumably, which is apparently one of 3 models. It's either a Smith & Wesson 40 caliber, which is, let's see, it's a model, I don't remember, can't find it, whatever. I have the link in the document. Or it is a Glock 22 or a Glock 23. The two Glocks, they look pretty much exactly the same. I'm not sure what the full difference is in terms of like why you choose one or the other. But
it's the caliber.
It really it is. Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the main differentiators is the caliber. So,
My knowledge to guns extends to guns in Counter-Strike. About how much I know about guns.
I know a little bit, but the idea is, so the Glock, there are sort of, I believe right now there's between models 17 and something like 23, and it depends on the caliber and the exact size of the weapon, like its physical size, because when they're chambered with a sort of a smaller caliber, you can build them smaller because the frame doesn't have to handle as much recoil.
Yeah, I found and added pictures, but they looked identical, so I couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah, I'm guessing
I was also
it's
kind of
because-
rushed doing research.
Yeah.
I think your pictures are actually identical. So,
Oh God!
yeah.
Oh my God, they are. No,
Yeah.
not quite. They're slightly different URLs, but
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
they're different
as I
URLs, but
shut up. As I was going through Full Moon, I was kind of tracking who had the FBI guns, and so Murphy takes Wilson's gun that Wilson used to kill Harris, and then Murphy kills Denton with Wilson's gun, which is very interesting to actually have to track down. Yeah. And Harry's same 38 Chief Special shows up again in Full Moon, and he shoots Parker in the knee with it. And then there's Murphy's 22 caliber that she uses for competition shooting that she's using against the Loup-Garou. And I guess, the 22 caliber means it's the smallest caliber bullet that you can have. And I added a picture as like showing how small it is compared to everything else. And I guess maybe it's easier for competition shooting because as she's making her own rounds, then she has less materials to need.
right. It's typically cheaper. There's less recoil, so you're more accurate with your follow-up shots, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the sound is obviously different, as he describes in Full Moon, that it's smaller. It's less of an explosion.
Yeah, and my guess is also, since it's a competition shooting, that similar to how even competition archers today will use arrowheads that are deliberately sort of meant to be very, like, if they harm a person by accident, it's supposed to be a very clean wound. I'm guessing it's the same principle here. Like, it's just adjusted for, let's make this as let's make it as hard as possible to kill someone if something goes wrong. My guess it is same principle here.
That is a very good principle to have until you're going up against a giant werewolf.
True, but on the other hand,
they're not planning for Loup-Garous, and that's fine. But it's a nice little difficulty added in just for Murphy.
Well,
who don't plan for Loup-Garous, really?
In Murphy's case, I think there's two considerations. One is that the fact, like you said, a 22 round uses less material, so she was able to get the silver, more rounds out of the silver. The other thing is she had the dyes already, so she can't. When you're reloading, you actually have to have the right size of tools to work with those rounds. So she wouldn't just start spitting out 223 cartridges for a rifle or anything like that. She had to have the specific tools for the 22 because that's what she uses for for her competitions.
Yep. And then going down the list, I guess the Uzi shows up as Denton is gunning down street wolves, and that gun really does seem very iconic of bad guy Russian things. It's a fun gun to look at. Yeah, and then a little bit later, Marcone has a rifle, and it's like unspecified, and that is another thing that's like it could be anything. It could be a hunting rifle, it could be a military assault rifle. So I added pictures of both.
Yeah,
I got the impression of a military rifle.
Me too.
Okay. I think one of your pictures is a 22, so we'll probably have to update that. But I always took it as some kind of hunting rifle because I thought he was using it with a scope and a laser, but who knows? With Marcone, it really literally could be anything because he's a dirty, cheating scumbag and he can afford whatever it is. So, if you're a gun
Yeah.
nut, you'll fantasize, and if you're a regular person, you'll think, oh, it's a really big hunting rifle. That makes sense. So
You're a pretty big gun nut, like a bit of a gun nut, right, Justin?
a little bit, because I was thinking, like, if I had unlimited time and money, then I would probably get a Lapua. But if you're in the neighborhood, maybe you want something a little smaller because, it depends on how much clearance you have and do you want to shoot your neighbors or not. So
A little off topic. Have you read the Monster Hunter International?
I'm familiar with it, but I haven't read it, no.
Okay, he's very into guns, the author, so I think you might get a kick out of it.
Yeah, Larry Correia is a little bit of he's sort of a gun celebrity, and he makes a big deal about how he's testified in front of Congress about his stance on guns and that sort of thing. So yeah, Larry Correia is pretty good for, his gun knowledge, and he's got his own little ranch where he hides out and shoots and everything. So
yeah, I have no idea about guns, but I can just feel when I've read all the books, and I can really feel it. Like the guns, he cares a lot. He really goes into detail.
Yeah,
fellow nerd and notice the nerdism come out.
I noticed the same thing when I was reading Shadow Ops, the first book in the. I don't know if any of you have read
Mike Cole.
Yeah, Mike Cole, exactly.
I don't think I know it.
So the author's name is Mike. It's spelled Myke. I read the first book. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I read the first book in the second series he did because he mentioned it was a good jumping on point for the setting, because it takes place a little earlier compared to the previous series. And he is, again, like, you can see that he's ex-military. You can see a lot of the sort of the interest in the technical details that aren't present with firearms and with, especially in his case, with like military technique and tactics. You notice a lot as well. And I actually noticed a little bit of it as well in some of the later books, but we're not sort of covering those in the scope of this. But there is a little bit of that in the Dresden Files as well, with Murphy and how she acts sort of later in the series.
I'm thinking Butcher probably has like some of his beta readers are probably ex-military or something. Like, I mean, probably.
It's possible, but I think I was going to mention it earlier when you brought up, it's kind of it's like a time period piece a little bit. Like, one is that he picks weapons that fit the noir style. So that's probably as much as anything why Harry uses the revolvers, even though in universe it's because semi-automatic sometimes jam. And you even see that in Stormfront. But it also adds to the timelessness because he's been really loath to pick out when exactly it is. We're pretty sure it's in the early 2000s, and it's just kind of kept up from there. But, it's easy to say that Beckett's automatic, for example, we could say that it was a Tommy gun because, it fits the noir style, and he never says it. And so, it's just kind of interesting that you can kind of imagine all of those things.
Yeah, that's obviously a part of it as well. Is
technology being mentioned and stuff. I kind of always felt like it's kind of just keeping. When the book comes out, that's roughly it's around the same time period.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and it also, I think the revolver in Harry's case is also interesting in the way he usually, like, obviously the revolvers sort of, or the handguns get used. At least his gets used less and less as the books sort of progress. But even when he is sort of using them in the beginning, part of the reason is usually when Harry is shooting them, for the most part, he's not aiming at people. And not people tend to be a lot tougher than people. And so he obviously, like, the idea with the revolver, and the reason revolvers are still sort of in use today is because they can chamber much larger bullets, because they don't have to worry as much about large magazines, because you've got 6 shots, that's it. And so sort of the way he tends to approach these things is, well, I'm going to shoot at something that's probably going to be really big, scary, and tough. And so obviously having a larger caliber helps with that.
Right.
I'm going to use this as a jumping point and get into the guns in Grave Peril, because he lost his 38 Chief Special in Full Moon. And when he describes his new gun, a medium-barreled 357, which is also a revolver, he just describes, I must have been feeling insecure that day or something, because it's apparently giant. It's called a Magnum revolver.
Right. So Magnum usually means that there's more powder in the load. So even though it's a 357 round and it would be the same as another 357, it's bigger it's bigger in the chamber, for lack of a better descriptor right now, where there's just more powder behind it. In a similar way, if you've actually ever seen a 223 round or a 556 round that the AR-15s or M16s use, the bullet is very, very tiny in comparison to the rest of the case, just because there's a whole shit ton of powder behind it because they want the velocity. So just interesting point, I guess.
More powder in the low. I feel like there's an innuendo in there somewhere.
Right. Well, and I definitely agree. So two things. Like, one is that he definitely does, get a bigger gun. And I think in a way that's probably Butcher just saying, look, shit's getting more and more real. He is leveling up. He is fighting bigger things. So he needs bigger guns to go with that. Right. And then the other thing, talking about how he used it more earlier on, when I was playing a first level sorcerer in D&D 3.0, when that came out, having 2 magic missiles and then a crossbow was really fucking important because you are going to run out of those 2 spells. So, it was definitely more of a crutch for Harry. But he tends to use it tactically or, when the shit has all the way hit the fan, which when we get to Turncoat will be a little bit more sense. But
yeah, I like that you point out the 2 spells and a crossbow because you could run out of spells. In each of these books, Harry runs out of his magic in some way. Like, he's just unable to keep going. He hits his wall. It gets stolen, or it just kind of stops because he can't do it anymore. And he's using guns or other things to kind of make up for it. That stops happening after these books.
Yeah, and that obviously has, I think, both a sort of a writing dimension and also an in-character dimension. Where the in-character dimension is obviously that he's getting better. Like, you can see that sort of consistently throughout, and usually it's in response to something that has happened to him. Like, the best example probably is after Blood Rites, where he gets the improved focus to deal with heat, because obviously he had the situation where he didn't have that and he got his arm burned.
I swear that scene is so, like...
It's gnarly.
It really gets to me, that scene. Like, oh.
But yeah, like that idea, and I think that sort of carries over with his magic as well, is that, he slowly gets more efficient at using it. So, and sort of gets more efficient about when he uses it. I don't know if that's reflected as well, but it sort of seems like the idea that he gets a little bit more careful about when he can solve a problem with magic and when he sort of has to step back and think, is there another way to solve this problem? And obviously from a sort of a writing perspective, the idea of taking away his magic or sort of limiting him in that way is a very effective way of sort of raising the stakes, because all of a sudden he doesn't have the most powerful tool in his arsenal. But it's also kind of cheap. Like, you can only do it so many times before it starts to lose a little bit of its punch, because you are never really quite certain, okay, when is he going to have access to this, and when is he just going to get his powers taken away? So it's used a lot more, I think, in these first 3 books than sort of subsequently, where it tends to be in a situation where magic wouldn't solve his problems anyway, like when he's chained up by Nicodemus with the thorn manacles. Like, where even if he had his magic, that wouldn't solve the problem because he was surrounded. But it tends to be used a lot more sparingly than it is in the first 3 books.
It's also, thinking of, like, if you don't have magic, what can you do? Well, the normals can't do anything. But again, going through Grave Peril, I was very impressed with Susan, of her, like, wicker basket of goodies just to defend off vampires. And it was fun cataloging everything that she had. One of it being a 45 handgun, and 45 bullet is really big. I think it's the biggest you can have for a handgun. Justin, is that right?
You could do a 50. So the Desert Eagle, that's what he uses in Skin Game, if I remember right. So Thomas starts using it a lot earlier because Thomas has super vampire strength. So
I bet Jim played some Counter-Strike. I was like, Desert Eagle, yeah.
Right.
Desert Eagles are like the staple thing for urban fantasy of shit's gonna explode. I forgot about that, but so basically Susan is not a very big woman, even though she's described as kind of tall. She has a very large for her handgun in her basket. as she's dressed as Little Riding Hood.
Yeah, and I think particularly with the 45, I think I can, even if it isn't described, I think I can almost tell what sort of it, like what kind of handgun it is. My guess is it's an M1911, because it is so just ubiquitous in American fiction, because it was the service pistol of the U.S. military from, I think, like 1911 until 75.
No, I think it still is.
It's still often used. They hop around a little bit, but 1911 is kind of America's favorite handgun. And what's interesting is because it's model 1911, that literally is the year. It always bugged me that Harry didn't use it because it's pre-World War II.
Murphy does. So in Summer Night, which we will get to in part 2 of the series,
right.
She uses a 1911, and it's like it stood out to me because when I learned what that gun was, it's like, oh, it's awesome, and yay. So I imagine it being a 1911 as well, just because it's like the handgun that everyone will think about is what they look like, either that or a Glock, based on like whatever TV they watch.
Yeah.
And let's see, in Grave Peril, there's also a semi-automatic that Kyle Hamilton uses to shoot at Harry, and no other description. And I just pictured an Uzi because that's just the one-handed thing that's easy to use for most people. Granted, he's a vampire, so I have no idea what it actually is.
I imagined like some sort of semi-automatic handgun, not necessarily like fully automatic like an Uzi.
Well, it depends, yeah. So in this case, it probably was, larger caliber, like maybe a Desert Eagle, though he specifically calls that out later. But the vampires tend towards two things. They tend towards some kind of handheld automatic because the recoil doesn't bother them, or the really fucking big rounds because the recoil doesn't bother them. And so they get to cheat a little bit, whereas, there's a reason why the U.S. military doesn't standard issue a 50 caliber round, 50 cal Desert Eagle. And they also don't standard issue a Tech 9 as your backup sidearm or something like that. Some of it's reliability, some of it is the fact that you're just going to miss. So, like I was saying, some of it's reliability and some of it's you're going to miss. So the full auto feature on a firearm's typically for like suppression types of techniques. You're not just full auto all the time, just always blowing through your ammo. So.
All right. I think that covers most of the discussion about guns. And again, document tons of links, mostly pictures. And you can yell at me if I got them wrong, which I almost definitely did. But let's move on to the other things. Like, I really liked cataloging Harry's duster and its evolution. And also, if you didn't know, El Dorado is a John Wayne movie. That's what they mean when it belongs on the set of El Dorado.
Oh. Okay.
Did you not know that?
I didn't know what that was. No, I looked up.
I don't think I've ever seen a John Wayne movie.
Okay,
yeah.
So True Grit is one of my favorites. So go watch the original True Grit. And
I've seen the new True Grit.
Yeah, the new True Grit is actually pretty good as far as a remake goes, in my mind. Anyway, I'm not like a huge Western fan, so if you are, don't hate on me because I liked a remake of it. But True Grit has some of the best lines of any movies. So.
I mean, I have not seen the older westerns, but I do enjoy westerns. I mean, like stuff like Tombstone. Like, I love that movie. That new western that's coming out, I'm definitely gonna watch that. The Magnificent Seven or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tombstone is really good.
I'm a little skeptical about Magnificent Seven because it's a remake of a remake. The original Magnificent Seven.
It's some really good actors, so I think it's gonna be a good watch.
Yeah, that's fair.
Unless the writing is really horrible.
Yeah, but the Magnificent Seven was based on arguably one of the greatest films ever made. So it has I'm talking about the original Magnificent Seven and the movie it was based on, which was Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. So
yeah, I've
I'm
never
a little
seen
bit
it,
skeptical of the idea of like the remake of the remake.
But yeah, never seen a John Wayne movie. Oh wait, is John Wayne in Three Brothers? Movie?
I have no idea.
It's the one where they're like brothers and they return home to their homestead after their mother has been killed. And then
I don't know. Look through his IMDb page, but it's like if anyone who does know what John Wayne is and looks like, then it's just a coat you can imagine him being like wearing and stuff. Like that's what apparently Harry's duster looks like. And it's both the canvas duster and the leather one that Susan gifts him because Michael makes the comment in Grave Peril as well.
Yeah, and obviously the duster is the really like it is the really iconic PI wear. So again, it's sort of interesting. It is interesting that he sort of, even when the series sort of starts to play around a lot more with noir tropes, he sort of finds a way to keep it back in the sense that it's a sort of, it's a full body or almost full body like it's almost a full body piece of clothing, so that probably makes it easier to maintain the enchantment on it because he doesn't have like a separate set of everything that he needs to maintain. He just has the one duster that sort of needs the regular maintenance in order to be effective.
Right. That's a good point. That's very practical, but we all know that Harry would wear that anyway. So
yeah, I mean he does.
Yeah, exactly, because he was.
The duster isn't enchanted for the first few books,
right?
He's still around everywhere.
And as far as noir style, like the duster's very Dick Tracy, the original canvas duster, and so I'm not sure, maybe the move to leather was just like, putting on the badass meter or something like that, but instead of just sticking with the cheap and effective canvas, but just a demonstration of him leveling up. But it was an interesting move.
I think it's when he found out that James Masters was reading his books, and Spike wears a leather duster. Buffy. That's why he did it.
That would be interesting to find out.
All right. Next point of discussion. Let's talk about potions. They show up in these books and not very much after. And I also found all of the ingredients that was listed in the books and put them on the document.
This one was actually, so this one is kind of a sticking point for me, maybe. My sort of point of entry to the series after I started reading the books was the RPG, because I caught up to where that was relatively quickly. And it was weird to me that they have a very sort of involved system for potions in that. And it was weird to me that this is never ever brought up in the series again. Like these first 3 books are the only ones where it really plays a major role, and then it just sort of patters out afterwards. And I'm wondering, I read a while ago, and I kind of keep saying that I think part of the reason he said he sort of phased it out is because more and more Harry needed to improvise and sort of get out of a situation very quickly, think on his feet, and obviously potions are sort of much more conducive to being able to prepare for what you're going into, and sort of and sort of trying to figure these things out.
Yeah. So with the potions, I think it is word of Jim where he basically says that 8 hours of making a potion was too much like rest and too much like downtime, and so he definitely accelerates the thing, but. Potion making never has as big an impact. Like he never devotes like a chapter or a half a chapter or anything to the ingredients or anything like he does. But I just finished Changes, and in Changes they're a relatively important minor plot point when they go into Nevada, where they get to the cliff and they're like, shit, how do we get down and how do we get back up? And he's actually had time to brew 3 flying potions that they drink half of to get down and half of to get back up. So it's not completely abandoned, but it's never quite as big a deal as it is in the first 3 books. And part of that's just time frame. Like you take the first book takes place over like half a week or a full week, most of them take place over 3 or 4 days. And then towards the end, it feels like it's like 2 days if you're lucky, so.
Yeah.
Also,
and
potions can make you really powerful if you do have that time to prepare. Too powerful for that underdog, huh?
Maybe, but they usually backfire, though, if you think about it. Like the love potion, total waste of time and made situations worse. The escape potion, mostly helped. The coffee kind of backfired in the sense that he got overconfident because it was like super coffee and it lasted for like 5 minutes. And so he just made a real big ass of himself and, blew out tires, messed up some people to make them really mad. So they spent the next 8 hours kicking the shit out of him, So the flying potion's one of the few times that it doesn't just totally blow up in his face in some way.
The blending potion or the escape potion?
So yeah, the escape one mostly works out from what I remember. Okay. Like the blending in.
Okay, they don't go very far, but I mean, for what it does well.
Right.
Yeah, that blending potion was a miracle, and I loved how it backfired. It just the nice structure of, wow, this is amazing, way too good. Once the shit starts hitting the fan.
Happened with a blending potion.
Yeah, blending potion, full moon against the Loop Guru.
Right. So he gets all the way into the security area, and then nobody fucking even pays attention to him. And then the Loop Guru finally gets out, and then it wears off and tries to eat him, and things like that. So yeah. But like the guard, he's trying to scream and yell at the guard's face, and he's like, the guard just makes up some dialogue and doesn't pay attention. So the Loop Guru has several more minutes to get out and start eating people in the detention area. So
that reminds me, for some reason, of I don't know if any of you have ever read a comic called Order of the Stick.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and there's the point where they have to sneak into a villain hideout, and one of them takes a potion of glibness, which is like a bluff potion. And it's just like 9 gag panels of people coming up with the most outrageous excuses for being where they are. That scene sort of reminded me a little bit of that, where it's just it's sort of the weird coincidences piling up on top of one another.
Right. Yeah, Order of the Stick, if you guys haven't heard of it, if you're interested in fantasy and specifically D&D, it kind of takes a little bit of fourth wall breaking where it's like modern references and that sort of thing, but it's like a lesson in how magic will break shit in interesting ways. And, they do use things in funny ways, and some of their panels are just gags, but there's actually an overarching story as well. So
yeah. So Justin, you were interested in the ingredients and specifically some of the more magical ones of the potions. You want to go on about that?
Yeah, so I think it was just my latest read through, which for the record, this is my third read through. And I noticed that he actually has like mouse scampers and things like that. And I mean, it's not like he doesn't hit you in the face with the magical sunlight handkerchief in the first place, where the handkerchief is literally meant as a potion component at first. But that was something that I thought was interesting, is that it was very, like the Sword and the Stone, like Disney quality witches and stuff like that, where it's like, and then we'll get the Eye of a Newt, and then we'll get Scampers of Mouse, and like that's part of his stealth potion and things like that, where it's like these impossible to obtain ingredients. It's not just exotic and unlikely like uranium dust, depleted uranium dust, which is another one.
You get that.
Right, exactly. It's like, I'm pretty sure that's not one that you can get on Amazon, and he also doesn't have a computer, even if you can. But so some of his,
even though Best Buy insists that that's clearly you need one.
Right,
I think it's Best Buy, right? It is Best Buy.
It's Best Buy and Circuit City, which I needed to go look up for future thing for Circuit City and see when they went out of business, because that'll help timeline Dresden a little bit. But yeah. He does reference
I'm
both.
giving you that assignment officially. You have to find that out and report back.
I've just been lazy. I could probably Google it. But yeah, so his exotic potion components, where it's like, mouse scampers and sunlight and things like that, was kind of interesting.
Yes, specifically the super coffee potion. Like it's coffee, a morning donut, a cock's crow, a beam of sunshine, a to-do list for your mind, and cheery music. It's just... This is so much more like a level of whimsical that we don't usually see in the rest of the series. And then it goes away. So,
right. There are a lot of things early on where it is kind of more fantastical, and then there are plenty of things that are just kind of funny, where if it doesn't just stick in your brain, you just kind of overlook it. But Dresden Files, we sort of tend to remember it for the noir, for a little bit of the darker, and it's definitely got its gore and things like that, because I think those impact us. But it very, like, if you took some of that away, it would still very much be on, the Disney level, where it's like fairies are everywhere and we've got these crazy components and things like that. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, funny you should mention the Eye of Newt thing, because that is again reference to the RPG, where someone sort of scrawls in the footnotes the Eye of Newt thing, because obviously Shakespeare and so on. And Bob mentions that this is an actual potion ingredient, and someone is like, wait, who did Shakespeare know back in the day? Like where it's sort of mentioned that a lot of the magic Shakespeare references was actual magic until it got exposed.
Shakespeare was obviously a wizard.
Well, actually, we're going to probably have an episode about Shakespeare and Gaelic and Arthurian thing. All of those things that we can't really pin down. So we're going to save that discussion for a different episode.
Fair enough. You can have it.
Thank you.
But I just thought it was kind of funny that it mentioned it was a potion ingredient until Shakespeare just sort of exposed it to everybody, and it lost all its power in the same way that, banned material that sort of gets released to the wider public sort of loses all its power, because everybody knows and everybody tries and nobody gets any effect out of it.
That's very strange if potion ingredients can then become their magical ability has to do with people's belief in them, which it kind of makes sense in terms of things like Bob is awesome because he can give you a recipe that works for your mind and make it work for you, and they have to be tailor-made for the person who's using it. Yeah, it's very strange in terms of belief that way, if massive people can do that.
Right.
It's funny though, with the whole belief equals power, but at the same time, if everybody knows of the Book of the Damned, then it doesn't work because everybody tries to use it. What if everybody believes it? Doesn't it get more power from that?
Right. Yeah, because you see both. Like you get the everybody gets to know it. Like the Necronomicon specifically, I think was the White Council published it to make the rituals not work anymore, and you get that in backup in the Oblivion Wars. But then you do get the faith gets more powerful, like the Shroud of Turin fake that gets stolen, where it might as well be the real thing as far as most people are concerned. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think it has a little bit to do with nature. And you mentioned specifically that it was faith that sort of, in some ways, empowers artifacts or empowers people or gods. But all of the things that were published weren't of that nature. These things were somehow magical in some way, like magic rituals that need a wizard to power them. And considering that we know a lot about wizards being information hoarders, like this idea that Harry isn't alone in having all of these sources of quote unquote emergency powers on his hands, and sort of having all of this knowledge and all of these forbidden rituals that are sort of lurking around in his head. He's not the only one who has that. But if he were to start, if he just published a book on a how-to guide on the Dark Hallow, and everybody went and tried it, if it would have the same result, because it's not faith and it's not belief, it's knowledge. It becomes common knowledge, and at that point, does it become worthless?
Right, and it's important to point out as well that in the Necronomicon's case, the give there is that it's some ancient being that's powering the ritual. Sure, you have to have some measure of magic to kind of call on it, but it's one of the great old ones, or it's whoever on the other side that's powering it. And if one person invokes it, that's a lot different than if 900 people invoke it, where that power gets kind of divided up. And that was the logic behind it. Whereas the Dark Hollow is a very interesting point, because that really is your internal knowledge and your access to raw materials. Sure, if everybody went around slurping up spirit energy and undead energy, that's going to be one thing. But since the Dark Hollow can also rip the life force out of everybody else, it would just be apocalyptic until there was just 3 or 4 big dudes slugging it out at the end, Highlander style.
Yeah, I can definitely see that as well. But but I do think like that has a little bit to do with it. Like, where does that power come from, and how does it how is it affected by more people knowing about it? Is I think sort of a little bit of a takeaway from that. But it is sort of interesting that if Harry were to say go out and publish the ingredients for this thing, and even if he just like distributed it amongst the council, that might still be enough people to where the potion's effects would be diluted. To where you sort of have to figure a lot of the stuff out on your own. It isn't like going to Hogwarts and finding the one recipe that works for everything.
The whole discussion of potions reminding me a year or two, or maybe even 3 years ago, I don't know, sometime on the subreddit, people were talking about why don't people use potions more often, and like if the White Council had just masses of potions around for everyone to use, there's a huge problem with that is the fact that they only last for like 3 days.
Does
The
it
magic
get
in them
potency,
wears
right?
off.
Every time there's a sunrise.
Yeah, they only last for a very short time. I assume it's because of the sunrise. The magic in them is like it goes away, so they have to keep making them and going through ingredients really fast. And like depleted uranium dust is really hard to find if you need that for your potion.
But like Harry's ghost dust, which needs uranium to be uranium, some other person's ghost dust might not need uranium. Like I think Mort makes ghost dust too, and he doesn't use uranium.
Yeah. Also in Ghost Story with that is that they were discussing like it's obviously like personal recipes just because they didn't share them, and then like the goop that Rashid has in order to be able to see glamour or see through them, I should say. It's like that's different than what Harry eventually does, which stains your eyes but doesn't smell so bad, or strongly at least. And it's just like all the recipes are personal somehow, and I keep wondering what is the line of is personal to how you work specifically versus just you can get the same effect with different ingredients.
Yeah, and that's like, and that's sort of an element of the series we don't see as much is the sort of, I guess, mundane aspect of how does one wizard teach another, because a lot of what we hear about is magic being this very personalized force. Like it's very sort of personally tailored to who you are as a person, how you use it and how it manifests. So I can sort of see the sorry, lost my train of thought there. I think it would be interesting to see a little bit more of how does a wizard then pass that on to someone who is less like themselves, like in the way that Harry taught Molly, who has a very different skill set to him. Like, how did that actually work is something I'd love to see a little bit more of going forward is wizard training.
I also wonder if you can see like magic lineages, like who was whose master in the way that they do magic and think about magic. Like for example, that Harry's line, or as I understand, it goes back to the original Merlin.
Which then goes back to Vaterung, which is really fun. And if we can find more connections there, that would be fantastic. But we know very little about it in general.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of a comment on the lineage thing. Again, I keep going back to the RPG in the Parroted Papers, where they mention that the Merlin, Arthur, has very much the same relationship with McCoy that he does with Dresden. Like it's the same sort of why do I have to deal with this person every time? So like you can probably see a little bit of that there. And we're also taught a lot that McCoy and Dresden have a very similar style where it's all about really overwhelming firepower. That's sort of the way they solve their problems with magic. So my guess is there is a little bit of a sort of a lineage thing. But on the other hand, Molly is kind of an outlier there because her powers are so very much more specialized in a different direction.
It could be that the similarity between McCoy and Dresden is kind of genetically inherited more than, just taught. Not just, they're not taught completely separate from each other, considering they are truly related to each other. It's another question is like, where's the boundary?
Yeah,
right. it becomes more important because in Turncoat, I think it's Ancient Mai brings up the fact that Harry wasn't truly Ebenezer's apprentice. That Ebenezer only watched over him for 2 years, whereas the genetics stuff starts to make a little bit more sense in the fact that they kept close touch certainly after that fact, because they're still close. And then in Changes, it comes out that yeah, they are the same bloodline, so maybe that's why Harry's as powerful as he is.
Yeah, and I guess like the missing link there is Margaret, and it would be interesting to see a little bit from Margaret's perspective. How did she actually? We know her death curse is like the one thing we have, and the necklace Harry gives him knowledge of the ways, but we've never seen her do magic herself. It would be interesting to see if she's kind of made of the same cloth, or if again, like Molly, she was a bit of an outlier.
We will probably never find out what it's like to be inside Margaret's head, because giving us a short story in her perspective would tell us too much.
Right.
Sadness.
Drives me crazy even though I understand it.
Right.
Sadness is real.
Well, and so kind of bringing up, sorry, we're getting a little off topic, but bringing up, how Margaret would have been and that sort of thing, seeing some of the hints, seeing some of what's happened with Molly and even Lucio, for example, and reference that with the way that Elaine does her magic, that she's never on Harry's weight class specifically, like with raw power, but she manages to equal him with her talent and with her gracefulness and her subtlety of how she uses her magic. And, it almost seems like every example of the female wizard we have is more efficient with their magic than Harry is, for example, or uses it in more subtle ways, whereas he's just like, I've got this really big hammer who wants to get nailed, and that's kind of his approach to everything.
Oh.
So, since we have mentioned Harry's amulet from Margaret, I want to, I guess, promote Bedali jewelry, which Jim has a connection with, in terms of like you can get official pentacle amulets, both with and without the stone, I believe, from Bedali jewelry. I think they cost around $25 to $30 or something. Also, I think force rings or something near that are sold, as well as the shield bracelet. So those are like the official ones from
Right.
Bedali jewelry.
I have one of the pentacles without the ruby. I got given that as a gift.
Help to sign it, or
no, but I mean, it is officially licensed stuff. So Bedali really, really became famous because they got the Lord of the Rings officially licensed jewelry, and they don't really hold back. Like they do have cheaper and stuff. Like you can get gold plated, the One Ring, for example. That's kind of where they started out, and those were around $30 as well. But they go all the way up to, this is solid silver. Yes, we freaking mean it. The shield bracelets are like 150, somewhere in there. And I don't particularly like the style because they're just silver. Whereas I would much rather get one of the White Knight, triple metal, and all the different shields and that sort of thing. So if I'm going to go all out, then I want to have the copper and the iron and whatever else he uses. I think he uses silver as well. So, but they're all just, I think they're just the silver ones that they sell so far. But
yeah, but all the official stuff, like Jim license approved, is from that place. That's all.
Right. And thanks for reminding me about the force rings, because they were still coming out the last I heard of them. And yeah, they do have them on their website now. So
yeah, and the force rings are just so much fun to think about. It's a cool little gadget, and then I like how he upgrades it, but we don't really get to discuss the upgrade until White Knight, I believe, and that's disappointing. So many parts.
Yeah, he actually uses his broke-ass shield bracelet for 2 books. Because it's a plot point a little bit in Proven Guilty, when he's going into the murk and things like that, when he powers up his shield bracelet, it gives off blue-white sparks like his pentacle amulet's light. And so it's a secondary light source that he's using. And so it's every time he powers it up after that fateful encounter, it's kind of busted. So
yeah, I'm going to pull us back to these 3 books that we're going to discuss of Morgan's Warden Sword. Ugh. Justin, you had more nerdism thoughts about that, and I'll turn over.
Well, yeah. So the reason why I wanted to talk about the Warden swords is that, I mean, Morgan's is the one that you see the most for a lot of reasons. You know, he's the one that does the executions that you see on screen, and Harry's Harry. But you know, it seems like not a lot of people fully understand that these are like, you know, +5 Vorpal sword type of swords, that they're not just really freaking special and they're not just attuned to the Wardens, but like if you take all of these things together, like if they're attuned to the Warden, they're sort of like, you know, I believe it's the Lawgiver is what they call it in Judge Dredd, where it's like no one else can use this sword. But even as early as Stormfront, for example, they talk about Snicker Snack goes the Scorpion and things like that. So their Vorpal sword, Snicker Snack being the sound that, you know, they use the Vorpal sword against the Jabberwocky, you know, things like that. And so it seems like the swords dispel magic. They're very rough on magical constructs, and that includes the undead, as we'll later see in Deadbeat. So, you know, it's still kind of indeterminate because things in the Dresden Files aren't, you know, it only has these 3 properties and you can only use it in these ways. They are still sort of implements, and, you know, Morgan uses it to cut through some of Harry's magic and things like that. But it was kind of interesting that it's like people seem to gloss over the fact that sword just like, you know, annihilated whatever the magical construct was, that the Scorpions were no threat at all to Morgan, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the Warden swords, what I think is kind of interesting is the way that, for the most part, when we've seen magic implements, they are made by, you know, the person they're meant to use. Like Harry has crafted all of his foci, and all of his sort of enchanted items, everything he's sort of done himself. This is one very special case where it was done by another wizard, and in fact, it had to be done with a level of finesse that she has been unable to replicate since. So obviously something about the creation process of this must be like wizard brain surgery level of having to sort of be of precision, which I think is interesting insofar as they're always meant for other people. Like Lucio has her sword, but like everyone else, but every other sword she's made since then has been for someone else, and this was sort of her knack, her talent before the body swapping.
And it's very interesting to think of something that becomes so official only starting with Lucio, because in Stormfront, Harry says as soon as Morgan puts his sword away, he's no longer acting in his official capacity, and so he punches him and then regrets it. But that can't have been like a real sign of being official, because that's only been around for as long as Lucio's been making them. So she's like, what, 300 years old maybe? And she's probably only been capable of doing that for 250 years of that at most. So
I think Lucio is like a little over 200 at this point, because it's mentioned in A Word of Jim that she can just barely remember the War of 1812, because obviously Italy wasn't involved. So she's about 220 something at this point. So even for like way too young, for example, to be on the senior council. But that's sort of the general age, I think, of Lucio. So yeah, probably the Grey Cloak was the symbol of the Wardens before that.
Yes. So like the sword isn't exactly that, and yet it has become that, and yet it has to go back to not being that because of all the new Wardens that are getting shut in, and they don't get to have a sword. There's still isn't like a sign of I'm on duty, except for the cloak. But even if you just like decide to, I don't know, putting the sword away is much more obvious.
Amazing, nobody else in the whole White Council. There's nobody else who can make those swords.
That's because they are super badass. You know, it's, you know, to take the D&D threads that I put in here because I am that kind of nerd. You know, +5 Vorpal. We're talking the tippy top end of what most PCs could strive to get.
You know how good +5 is in 5.0 now. That would be insane. Like you don't get +5. The big legendaries as like +4 maybe.
Right. So it's that sort of thing. And I mean, so maybe it's Lucio's specific swords have only been that for a while, but the other Wardens, like even Chandler doesn't have one of her swords, or at least it isn't mentioned as near as we've seen. But he's got his, his walking cane that's presumably a sword cane as well. So maybe just having a sword is kind of the official. While your weapon is drawn, you're pretty much the strong arm of the council. But having these silver magical impossible swords is more Lucio. Which the fact that they emphasize the fact that they're silvery and not just steel always kind of makes me hearken to the Githyanki as well, for you other D&D nerds out there. So I know I just lost like 80% of you, but that'll make sense to other people. Yeah.
I played Neverwinter Nights 2. I got that one.
There you go.
I mean, I'm a 5.0 D&D guy, so I don't think I got that. What was the reference?
The Githyanki are a species of sort of extra-dimensional creatures in D&D, and they specifically use weapons that are sort of silvery. Are
they in 5.0?
Probably.
I have no idea. I haven't played 5.0 yet.
Spell it out for people who don't know it. What do we Google?
Oh, it's Githyanki, Githyanki. And the silver swords are particularly important because the Githyanki were the ones that you didn't want to run into when you got to high levels, because you would start to do astral projection. And in D&D, when you go to the astral plane, you leave behind a little silver thread that leads back to your body. And as long as that thread is intact, you are fine. But the Githyanki's swords could cut that thread and pretty much kill you instantly. So I don't know how that would tie into the Dresden Files universe, but that's what it always kind of reminded me of, was that they're, when you saw them, it was pretty much like, you should not be here, you should run, because they were going to fucking murder you. So,
but the question with the Wardens. But the question with the Warden swords as well is, so we know that Lucio is obviously currently the one who crafted these, but the question is, have there been wizards who have had that talent before, or like that ability, and it's sort of been passed down? Because that could obviously also explain why nobody else has been able to do it, is because Lucio was the person who knew how to do it, and now if she needs to, like if there needs to be a new person forging these blades, then they need to learn everything that Lucio did. So, and that stuff takes time. Like really advanced magic takes time and patience to learn, and she obviously has to find the right person to go and do these things now.
Right.
And there's a candidate on the council right now for that.
And that's kind of the open question, because it wasn't just her knowledge, otherwise she'd be able to do it, but her body just lacks whatever that special sauce was that she was able to do these swords with. And so you've got to find, like, the next person, if it became that big of a deal where they were hunting that person down, it's like, you're the chosen one. You can make these badass swords for the council again. And maybe that's something that won't reappear for, 50 or 100 years if it's that rare. But it seems like with the red cord out of the way, hopefully things will settle down. I know that's not going to happen, but once things start to settle down, they'll find that person again. So it's probably mostly Butcher did that because, much like having a cell phone, having one of these magic swords would make Harry stupid fucking powerful. So
it would make his life way too easy. We don't want that.
Still breaking sword.
It would also make him too accepted with the White Council people. It's like, see, I have the thing that makes me official. You have to like me now. But if he doesn't have that and he's still kept on the sidelines, and he can't be accepted anywhere, that'd make
he's even a regional commander. Come on,
But you don't have to like it. But if he has the badge, then maybe they have to like it a little bit more. I don't know. But I'm going to switch this to a different sword, and we can talk about Amarachius. And then this whole discussion has made me wonder if Amarachius is Excalibur, which we are going to be discussing in a future episode, is maybe Merlin the person who forged Amarachius?
Okay, so one point about Amarachius being Excalibur that really bugs me, and I'm sorry, I have to bring this up because I am kind of a blades nerd. So Amarachius is very explicitly described as a longsword, like a cruciform longsword, which are forged, like if you're talking about a one-handed sword, yeah, that would be about maybe 10th, 11th century where they started getting the really wide cruciform hilts. But the longsword is a 14th, 15th century thing. And as far as we know from the time frame Merlin was alive, he was alive when the Roman Empire was the Western Roman Empire was collapsing, because we know that he salvaged all of these artifacts. How would he know how to build a 14th, 15th century sword in the 5th century before they even had the steel they need to forge
He
these
ages
weapons?
back through time.
There's so many different ways that could happen. So so first of all, to assume that you're correct, and like these time frames are well known. That's not the part that I'm arguing, but like Harry's not any better with swords than he is with guns and identifying them. And so I think as much as anything, Michael has a look, because I think they also describe it as like a broadsword. They give Morgans to swords 3 different kinds of
It's actually not a long
descriptions.
sword, because a long sword will not be able to be carried on the hip, which he does. Like a long sword is a big ass fucking sword.
Yeah,
Well, if you're thinking like
Amaracus's blade or entirety is described as being 5 foot long. So
Yeah,
Okay, so
I mean, it's just that the way that Matthias described it, it was like, I imagine one of the really big swords on the back, what was invented in the.
That's a great sword. A long sword you can wear on the hip. I've tried.
right.
But long swords are a bit like, funnily enough, long swords are pretty long. But if it's described as 5 foot, I wouldn't. I'm not sure I'd give it that. Sorry, American measurements annoy me.
Yeah, 5 feet is really fucking long. Like,
Yeah,
that's-
5 feet is pretty long. That
that's
would be a
almost
proper long
all of
sword.
my height. I am 5 foot 5 inches. Therefore, it's like everything except for my head.
Right.
Yeah,
And he just wears it on his hip. So
He's also really big though. Like he's supposed like I picture him like 6'4" and like 230 pounds of muscle. So that shouldn't be very hard for him to move. They are also not as heavy as most people would think. It probably would only be like 8 to 10 pounds. Sorry for the American units, but
but 8 to
I
10
can't
pounds,
do-
try swinging that for 5 minutes.
yeah, 8 to
That's
10
Yeah,
pounds
but
are actually pretty heavy for a sword.
Right.
I think a long sword would be something like maybe
I
6 or 7
overestimated.
at most.
right.
I overestimated, but it's like it's
Yeah.
they're not like extremely heavy as people who are not familiar with them would think of it. Like I think if I hadn't researched it, I'd probably think it's probably like 30 pounds, just because they're big giant chunks of metal, right? It's like
Yeah.
they're not, because it's hard to use them if you're that heavy.
Yeah, I think the heaviest sword I've seen is when I went to a museum in Sweden, in Gotland. There's a museum dedicated to a battle fought there, where they have this, and this is a great sword. This is one of those, like, this is taller than the person swinging it. They had one of those, and it was like 5 kilograms, so about 10, 11 pounds, something like that. That's the biggest, sort of heaviest sword I've seen. A long sword would be, again, 6, 7 pounds, something like that.
And Amaracus is also the only of the 3 holy swords that's never changed form, right? The other 2 has been reforged
Correct.
several
I don't
times.
remember.
I remember
Yeah,
this.
That's part of what makes it, the whole like, oh my god, it might actually be Excalibur thing, is because Amarachius has basically been said, look, they made it and it hasn't changed in a few thousand years, or hundreds, or whatever the descriptor is, but that's part of what makes it more awesome. And yeah, I don't know.
It's also, I think it's the oldest of the 3. I don't know obviously dating the Kusanagi, which is said to be the template for Fiddleachus, is difficult because it's a mythical weapon. But the weapon that Esperachus is based on is, as far as I remember, the Durandal, which was a weapon from that one of Charlemagne's 12 peers wielded. So that would make it about 1,200 years old, as opposed to Amaracus, which would be maybe 1,500 years old, if we're going by this happened sort of like, if we go by and obviously I'm making assumptions here that Arthur Pendragon in the Dresden Files universe lived around the time the Saxons invaded Britain, which would be in the mid 5th century. It would be about 1,500 years old, and the Durandal wouldn't be forged for another at least 300, because that's when you sort of have Charlemagne and Charlemagne's court, and obviously Charlemagne's paladins, including the guy who wielded the weapon that Esperachus is supposedly based on. But that might be like speculation I just pulled out of nowhere.
So the last time that that's what's his that's the why can't I remember his name now? The Russian,
Sanya.
his weapon, right?
Yeah.
And then so that would be the last time that was reforged, even though it's been reforged several times. Would be that long ago? You think so?
Possibly. As we go through the gear, gadgets, and guns series and doing more research of it, I will try to find all of the references in the books that give more of a background for each of these swords, especially as they come into the series. And as we're doing things like with Arthurian legends, I'll try to find as many answers as I can about all of this.
Yeah, and that is actually now that you. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, you go. You're first.
Okay. One thing as well is so. Obviously, Harry pays sort of close attention to the idea that the two people he knows who have wielded, or the three people he knows who have wielded a sword of the cross have all been descended from a king of some kind. And it's interesting as well. So he says that Michael is descended from Charlemagne, and Sanya mentions he's descended from Saladin. There's actually another common thread between the two in that it's mentioned, again, in A Word of Jim, that Saladin was a Knight of the Cross. And obviously, like I said, the Durandal has its roots in... It wasn't wielded by Charlemagne. It was wielded by, I think, Roland, one of his 12 peers. But it's interesting, again, that this isn't... Like, they aren't just related to famous kings. They're related to famous kings who actually wielded a sword at one point. And obviously, we don't know anything about the last king of Okinawa, but the two others have that sort of the common thread of these were people who have wielded a sword before, and their descendants are now wielding them as well.
Do we know what like the you say that the what sword, like you say the two other swords have like a type of legendary sword they're based upon, like the what was the name you used for the classic Crusader sword?
Durandal, but obviously it's been reforged. Sana uses a cavalry saber, which makes me think it was reforged sometime during the Napoleonic Wars or something like that, like back when cavalry
saber. I did not think that cavalry saber was Esperachius. It was just another thing that he uses to, or like, I can safely chop at this without worrying about hurting anything.
Yeah, I don't know, but if it like the sword, like the sword that Esperachius is supposedly based on is called the Durandal. It's mentioned in the Song of Roland, I think it's called, an old Frankish epic poem about the 12 peers. And
you know, like, is the katana based on anything? Just the katana?
The implication, again, I don't know if it's just implication, is that it's...
Like, we're just making a qualified guess here. But.
Yeah. The implication is it's the Kusanagi, which the original version of that is still, like, in our world, there's still I don't know if it's the original, supposedly the original version of, like, or like a replica is one of the 3 treasures of Japan. It's this really old sword that was supposedly used by, I think it's one of their, it was a god, I think, Susanoo, who used it to kill a, he was on, I know the myth in like really loose terms, on a redemption quest, kill some sort of giant beast with this weapon, and so it's sort of become one of the 3 treasures of Japan. So it has also been reforged into a katana. The original version was a very small sword of a very different type. There's a, I'll try and see if I can find a reference and put it in the document somewhere, but the Kusanagi is a different type of sword than a katana.
And now it's a lightsaber.
That's a good point.
It's a lightsaber.
I will add this into the relevant places when Phytolachius comes up and everything. We are at over an hour, I believe. Do we have anything else we want to add into this episode, mostly focusing on the first 3 books of the series and the gadgets and gear and guns? Nope. Okay.
Oh.
All right, then just repeating that all of the iTunes and old website and old RSS, they are going to be shut down on Halloween of this year, and then we're going to just completely focus on the new stuff that you can find at Broken Jars at XYZ for the Dresden Files, 42 podcast, Dangerous to Go Alone, Shylock's Gaming, High Fantasy, and Great Scott. I almost forgot that one. I think that's everything. And Justin, am I forgetting anything?
I mean, that sounds like all of it. So,
all right, yeah, we're going to be continuing this research and come back to it in a few months. Next time, we're going to be talking about religion, and I'm going to be completely out of my depths. Yeah,
I just
that should be it.
Exited the Danish People's Church. I have no concept of religion at all.
I have obviously I'm probably not going to be there, but have fun with it. But I do have a little bit of sort of I know a little bit about religion, religious doctrine, and stuff like that, mostly because it fascinates me. So
yeah, we're actually going to have a guest that is a genuine priest. That's why we're doing this. I think
that's going to be.
Hopefully, he'll help us through this, but I'm kind of lost.
That's going to be interesting. I can't wait to hear that one.
Yeah, we are scheduled to record that one on October 8th, and I will be posting the live link on Twitter and everything. That we are done. Everyone say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.